There is a reason professional thieves spend months planning a job. They study blueprints, they time security rotations, they run contingency scenarios. They do this because stealing things, as it turns out, punishes improvisation with extraordinary enthusiasm and absolutely no sense of humor. Today's episode is about 10 people who looked at that fact and decided it did not apply to them personally. 10 criminals who planned their heists the way most people plan a grocery run, and who discovered, at varying speeds and with varying degrees of spectacle, that the laws of physics are permanently and impartially on the side of whatever they were trying to steal. Number 8 is the one our researchers have asked us to specifically warn you about. It involves a sewer, a chemistry lesson, and a getaway plan so comprehensively wrong that the universe appears to have designed it as a teaching example. Your only homework is to take notes on what not to do, which should be easy, because every single person in this video will demonstrate it for you personally. Number 1. Let us begin in Odessa, Texas, a city in the Permian Basin that has given the world oil wealth, Friday night football, and on one particular Thursday evening, a 36-year-old man who attempted to open an ATM with a homemade cutting torch and discovered, with considerable surprise, that the ATM had opinions about this. Meet Dale, a man whose relationship with long-term planning could most accurately be described as non-existent. He had developed, through years of watching oilfield machinery operate, a belief that heat solved most mechanical problems. His plan in ATM is a metal box, metal melts, melted metal opens, money exits. He had constructed what he described to an acquaintance as basically a professional rig, using 2 propane canisters, a length of copper tubing, and a welding tip sourced from a supply store outside Midland. He had not purchased a regulator. He felt, with the confidence of a man who had watched other people weld things for several years, that regulators were for people who lacked intuition. A properly designed cutting torch manages fuel to oxygen ratio with a regulator, delivering a controlled flame at a predictable temperature. Without a regulator, that ratio is governed entirely by ambient conditions at the moment of ignition, which is to say it is governed by nothing at all. An unregulated propane-oxygen mix can produce a temperature exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the first fraction of a second, enough to ignite clothing, melt eyewear, and cause third-degree burns before the nervous system has processed that anything has begun. The ATM Dale chose was bolted to an exterior concrete wall at a closed convenience store that had, he believed, no active surveillance. It had a security camera on a cellular uplink. Dale had not checked. He crouched behind his truck at 11:47, opened both propane canisters simultaneously, and achieved the kind of ignition that the regulator he had skipped existed specifically to prevent. The responding officer, reviewing the cellular camera footage later, described the event in his written report as a significant thermal event. The ATM panel scorched. It did not open. The fire moved onto Dale's jacket, his truck's rear tire, and a recycling bin 3 feet to the left, all of which were considerably more cooperative than the ATM. Investigators found Dale's toolkit, 1 intact propane canister, and $47 in small bills that had fallen from Dale's own pocket during the event. The ATM contained $8,300, which it kept. He wanted to open a metal box with fire and he got fire, enthusiastically and in all directions except the one he intended. Combustion, as always, showed its work, and its work was thorough. That story was about a man who brought fire to a job that required a plan. Our next story takes us to a man who brought a plan to a job that required physics, and physics was not consulted. Number 2. Rome, Italy, has survived 2,700 years of ambitious people attempting things they were not fully prepared for. The city has developed a philosophical patience about this. 42-year-old Lorenzo, however, managed to test that patience in a way that not even Rome had specifically anticipated. Lorenzo described himself as a freelance procurement specialist, which is a phrase that sounds impressive right up until you learn that his most recent procurement project involved the rooftop of a Trastevere gallery, a 12-meter rope, a harness purchased for €31 from a camping surplus site, and a second floor window he had confirmed was unlatched during a visit he conducted while pretending to be interested in the art. He had been interested in the art in the sense that he spent 40 minutes calculating which pieces were small enough to carry. Gravity does not care about your experience level, your budget, or the elegance of your plan. In a repelling scenario, the dynamic load, which includes the weight of the person plus forces generated by movement and any jerk in the line, can reach 2 to 3 times the static body weight at peak moments. Lorenzo weighed 88 kilograms. His peak dynamic load was in the range of 230 kilograms. The anchor point he chose was a decorative iron ring on the rooftop parapet, approximately 60 years old, embedded in mortar that a structural assessor would later describe as considerably past its useful service life. The ring had been installed as an architectural accent. It had never been load tested. The first 3 meters of his descent went beautifully. Lorenzo pushed off the parapet with evident confidence. He was managing his speed with a friction device assembled from 2 carabiners and a webbing loop. 3 meters down, 6 meters above the street, the mortar around the decorative iron ring concluded its analysis. The ring separated from the parapet cleanly. The rope went slack. Lorenzo covered the remaining 9 meters without it. The gallery's collection was entirely undisturbed. The parapet lost 1 decorative ring. Investigators confirmed the anchor failure in under 30 seconds of examination, noting that the mortar disintegration was visible to the naked eye from ground level. He wanted to descend 12 meters and exit, with several €100,000 of gallery inventory. Gravity delivered him to street level exactly as planned, simply faster and more directly than the rope had been intended to facilitate. Natural selection, as always, showed its work. That story went downhill quickly and entirely on schedule. Our next story also involves a confident plan and a very unimpressed building, this time in Manchester, where Nigel had researched his chemical incapacitation strategy with 11 videos and not a single safety data sheet. Number 3. Manchester, England, is a city of industrial heritage, formidable football rivalries, and rain that arrives with the regularity of a standing appointment. On a wet Wednesday in November, a 29-year-old man named Nigel produced a criminal enterprise so self-defeating that responding officers reportedly had to compose themselves before writing the incident report. Nigel had watched 11 videos about incapacitating security guards with homemade chloroform. He had synthesized approximately 400 milliliters from household bleach and acetone, transported it in his jacket pocket, and arrived at the rear entrance of a pharmaceutical supply warehouse in Trafford with the jar, a cloth, and a plan he had described to his flatmate as basically foolproof. His flatmate had expressed no opinion, which was a missed opportunity. Chloroform does have anesthetic properties. This is accurate. What the 11 videos did not convey is the behavior of chloroform vapor in a confined space. Chloroform evaporates rapidly from an open container, producing a vapor approximately 4 times heavier than air that sinks and accumulates at floor level. In an unventilated corridor roughly 2 meters wide by 3 meters tall, vapor concentration can reach anesthetic levels for an average adult male in under 4 minutes of continuous off-gassing. The gap between anesthetic concentration and lethal concentration is not wide. Safe exposure limits sit at 2 parts per million over an 8-hour workday. Anesthetic concentration is approximately 15,000 parts per million. Nigel had been standing in the corridor, jar open, cloth prepared, for approximately 4.5 minutes before anything interesting happened. The interesting thing was not the guard becoming unconscious. The guard, who had been on a scheduled break in a ventilated room, arrived at the corridor entrance, noticed the smell, recognized it from secondary school chemistry, and retreated immediately. Nigel did not retreat. Nigel was by this point experiencing the cognitive impairment that chloroform vapor produces in early exposure, a warm, slightly dizzy sensation that interferes with the judgment required to recognize you are being poisoned. He was found 11 minutes later, seated against the wall, the jar tipped on its side. The guard called emergency services. The paramedic described the scene as the most efficient self-incapacitation I have encountered in this career. He wanted to put someone else to sleep. Chemistry applied its effects to whoever was standing in the vapor, and Nigel had given it an 8-minute head start. The only thing more thorough than his preparation was his failure to consider which direction the vapor would travel. That story involved someone who did careful research and stood directly in the results of it. Our next story involves someone who did no research at all and treated a pharmacist's inventory like a personal medicine cabinet 63 kilometers per hour. Number 4. Sao Paulo. Brazil is the largest city in the southern hemisphere, 22 million people moving at a velocity that makes most other cities feel like they are operating in slow motion. It is a particularly poor environment for a getaway driver experiencing an unplanned pharmaceutical emergency on the marginal Pinheiros. Fernanda was 33, experienced behind the wheel of anything with an engine, and had been the getaway driver on 6 previous jobs without incident. She was, by the standards of her professional context, reliable. On the evening in question, her crew had hit a pharmaceutical distribution warehouse in Guarulhos, which meant the back of the van contained an unorganized collection of commercial products that none of the 4 occupants had expertise in identifying. Fernanda had been awake for 31 hours. 40 minutes into the getaway, she reached behind her seat and selected a blister pack of what she believed, based on packaging color, was a stimulant similar to one she had used before. She was approximately correct. It was an ephedrine-based bronchodilator used clinically for acute asthmatic episodes, a sympathomimetic agent that activates adrenergic receptors throughout the cardiovascular system, causing rapid increases in heart rate, blood pressure, and cardiac output. In a person awake for 31 hours under significant situational stress, the addition of 60 milligrams of a clinical-grade sympathomimetic produces a cardiac load that the body's regulatory systems cannot manage. The medical term for what followed is hypertensive crisis with secondary arrhythmia. The van traveled straight through a red light, and then introduced itself to the concrete sound barrier on the right side of the marginal with sufficient force to deploy all 4 airbags. Fernanda was in full cardiac arrhythmia when paramedics arrived. The entire van contents were recovered intact by the Polizia Militar, including the blister pack with 2 tablets removed, documented in the evidence log with what investigators later noted was considerable irony. She wanted to stay sharp for the getaway. Pharmacology, which has no interest in your professional schedule, delivered exactly what the label described, at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong body. That story was about treating other people's medicine as your own. Our next story has an entirely different energy, because sometimes the universe does not simply punish criminal ambition. Sometimes it humiliates it in front of witnesses with the help of a chain and a Mitsubishi pickup truck. Number 5. Osaka, Japan, is a city of pragmatic efficiency and world-class engineering. The ATM networks in Osaka are embedded in structures designed to resist seismic activity and typhoon force winds. This is relevant because it tells you exactly how much the laws of physics were going to enjoy what 38-year-old Hiroshi attempted on a Sunday morning at 4:15. Hiroshi had solved every problem in his life through the application of sufficient force. He identified a freestanding ATM kiosk in a commercial car park, drove his friend's Mitsubishi Triton to the location, wrapped a tow chain rated for 3,500 kilograms around the ATM's base housing, attached the other end to the Triton's rear tow hitch, and settled into the driver's seat with the calm confidence of a man who believes he has already solved the problem. Newton's third law states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, a principle that sounds abstract until you are sitting in a pickup truck, connected by a rigid chain to an object, bolted to reinforced concrete with 4M20 anchor bolts, torqued to 240 Newton meters each. The ATM weighed approximately 800 kilograms and had a combined anchor resistance of approximately 48,000 newtons. The Triton's combined tire grip on smooth asphalt under aggressive acceleration was roughly 12,000 newtons. Hiroshi floored the accelerator. The ATM did not move. The chain went taut in approximately 0.4 seconds. The tow hitch, not designed to absorb the kinetic energy of a 2,000-kilogram vehicle decelerating from 40 kilometers per hour to 0 in a fraction of a second, separated from the chassis entirely, traveled rearward at a velocity momentum had been building toward since Hiroshi hit the gas, and re-entered the vehicle through the rear windshield. The ATM remained on its pad in perfect working order. Hiroshi was arrested at a convenience store 300 meters away, purchasing ice for a laceration the returning tow hitch had contributed to. The security camera had captured the entire event in high definition. He wanted to pull a cash machine off its foundation with a pickup truck. Newton's third law delivered its standard response, same as always, for everyone, without exception. The universe added the specific editorial flourish of sending the evidence back through the window, which was, in the circumstances, unnecessary but thorough. That story ended with a tow hitch going the wrong direction. Our next story takes the temperature down to -196 degrees, where Vasily had a plan involving liquid nitrogen that was genuinely impressive for about 45 seconds. Number 6. Novosibirsk, Russia, sits in the geographic center of a country where winter temperatures regularly reach -40, and where the cultural response is a competitive indifference to discomfort that foreigners find either admirable or alarming. 45-year-old Vasily found this inheritance useful in his professional life, which involved acquiring other people's property through methods their insurance had not anticipated. Vasily's system was elegant in conception. When a steel padlock shackle is cooled rapidly below -190 degrees Celsius, the metal undergoes ductile to brittle transition, becoming brittle enough that a moderate sharp impact shatters it rather than forcing the lock mechanism. This technique is real. Security professionals know about it. Padlock manufacturers know about it, and had for approximately 9 years been producing high-security models using shackle alloys specifically formulated to resist cryogenic embrittlement. Vasily had learned the technique from a video. The video did not mention the 9 years of metallurgical development that followed. He sourced a 5-liter Dewar flask of liquid nitrogen, transported it to a commercial storage facility in the Kurovsky district, poured 600 milliliters over the shackle of a 47mm grade 5 commercial padlock, waited 45 seconds, and struck with a hammer. The shackle rang like a bell. It did not shatter. Any reasonable person would have paused here. Vasily raised the flask to pour more nitrogen, which was when the flask, which had been developing an internal pressure fault from off, gassing during 40 minutes in a warm car, concluded its own contribution to the evening. Liquid nitrogen expands to approximately 694 times its liquid volume when it vaporizes. A 5-liter flask under pressure does not fail gently. The release velocity covered Vasily's face, neck, and hands in liquid at -196 degrees Celsius. Cryogenic contact burns cause immediate cellular destruction. They are painless at first because nerve function is suppressed, and then they are not painless at all. He was found by a security patrol 40 minutes later. The padlock was intact. The Dewar was in 3 pieces. Vasily's hammer was still in his hand. The storage unit remained locked throughout. The technique had worked for Vasily in exactly the way techniques work for people who learn them from videos without reading any of the subsequent development in the field. He wanted to shatter a padlock with cold. Thermodynamics delivered cold in quantities he had not budgeted for and applied it to a surface he had not considered. The padlock is in the evidence room to this day, and it is fine. That story involved a material science lesson and a padlock that emerged entirely unharmed. Our next story involves a different kind of current because Kylie had a wire cutter and an extremely confident opinion about which wire was the alarm. Number 7. Perth, Western Australia, has a quality of light that photographers travel from the other side of the world to experience. This quality, unfortunately, does not extend to commercial premises at 2:30 in the morning, which is the specific context in which 26-year-old Kylie found herself with a pair of wire cutters, a headlamp, and a level of confidence in her electrical knowledge that the situation was about to assess very rigorously. Kylie had planned the job with genuine effort. She had visited the Mount Lawley Jewelry Boutique 3 times during business hours, identified the alarm panel location, noted the conduit routing along the exterior wall, and concluded that the alarm circuit ran in the gray conduit visible in the rear utility corridor. She had not consulted an electrician. She had consulted a friend who had done some electrical work, who told her the gray conduit was probably the alarm. The word probably was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Commercial buildings renovated before 2007 in Australia were subject to wiring standards that were applied with varying consistency, meaning conduit color could have no reliable relationship to the circuit it carried. The gray conduit in the boutique's utility corridor carried 1 alarm circuit and 1 lighting circuit on a shared run installed by a contractor in 2004 who had subsequently retired, taking his documentation with him. Both wires were blue. The lighting circuit came from a main switchboard that was live because the owner used a motion-sensitive display lighting system on a timer. Kylie cut the first wire. The display case lights went out. She took this as confirmation that she had found the alarm and cut the second wire, which was carrying 240 volts at 15 amps. At that voltage and amperage, the physics are immediate and non-negotiable. The current delivered through the low resistance path of a wire cutter held in an ungloved hand crosses the threshold of lethal cardiac involvement in the first contact event. The grip tightens involuntarily, as it always does, because the muscles contract rather than releasing under current. The alarm, which was on the 3rd wire in the conduit, remained active throughout and notified the monitoring center at 2:31. Officers arrived at 2:44. The jewelry cases were intact. She wanted to cut the alarm and leave with the display cases. Electricity, which has no opinion on your intentions and an extremely consistent opinion on what happens when you bridge its circuit with your body, delivered its verdict without delay, without negotiation, and without any apparent interest in which wire she had been aiming for. That story was about the specific difference between probably and definitely. Our next story goes underground, where Guadalajara's sewer system had a chemistry lesson prepared for Eduardo that the city had been setting up for 11 months. Number 8. Guadalajara. Mexico is the 2nd largest city in the country, a place of magnificent colonial architecture, and approximately 15 meters beneath its downtown streets, a municipal sewer network where certain lower-lying sections contain atmospheric chemistry that hazmat teams approach in full respiratory protection, and that Eduardo, a 31-year-old who had seen a heist film involving a sewer escape, approached with a bandana and remarkable optimism. Eduardo had identified a bank branch in the Analco neighborhood, confirmed that the building's rear utility access was adjacent to a municipal sewer maintenance entry, and concluded that the sewers offered a route that bypassed every camera, every guard, and every locked door between him and the cash drawers. He had rehearsed the entry. He had timed it. He had not consulted anyone with knowledge of what municipal sewers contain, because that answer would have ended the plan before it began. The primary hazard in a closed sewer system is hydrogen sulfide gas, produced by anaerobic bacterial decomposition of organic material. At low concentrations, it smells powerfully of rotten eggs. At concentrations above approximately 100 parts per million, it paralyzes the olfactory nerve, eliminating the smell signal entirely. A person moving from a low concentration area to a high concentration area will experience the smell disappearing and may interpret this as the hazard decreasing, when in fact the hazard has increased to the point where their nose has simply stopped reporting it. At concentrations above 500 parts per million, hydrogen sulfide causes near instantaneous loss of consciousness followed by respiratory failure. The sewer section Eduardo entered ran beneath a block housing a textile processing facility, a restaurant with a large grease trap, and a veterinary clinic, a combination that municipal hazmat inspectors had flagged the previous year and recommended increased ventilation for. The ventilation improvement had been scheduled, it had not yet been completed. Eduardo was wearing a bandana over his nose and mouth. Hydrogen sulfide is a gas. It passes through fabric the way air passes through fabric, which is to say completely and without difficulty. He had approximately 4 minutes of consciousness from the point of entering the high concentration section. His body was found by a maintenance crew the following morning, who entered in full air, supplied respiratory equipment as the safety protocol for that section required. The bank opened normally at 9. The cash drawers were accessed by staff using the keys, which are the appropriate tool. Eduardo wanted to use the city's infrastructure as his private access route. The city's infrastructure had been running its own chemistry experiment in that section for 11 months, and Eduardo had walked into the results without checking whether the experiment was finished. The bandana is currently in the evidence archive, and it is, as the forensic report noted with no apparent irony, entirely clean. That is the reason hazmat teams are equipped the way they are, and it is the story we warned you about at the beginning. Our next story moves above ground and into the daylight, where Christophe had an allergy he had simply never gotten around to discovering. Number 9. The city of Lyon, France, sits at the confluence of 2 rivers and has operated for centuries as one of Europe's most important commercial crossroads. It was also, on a Wednesday evening, the location of what 40-year-old Christophe had identified as the cleanest residential burglary of his career, and what the building had been quietly preparing a response to for approximately 8 years. Christophe was methodical. He had surveilled a historic townhouse in the Presqui district for 2 weeks. He knew the owner's schedules, the alarm panel location, and that the second-floor study contained the items he was after. What external survey had not revealed was that a renovation in 2016 had sealed a large void in the load-bearing wall between the ground floor reception room and the exterior wall, and that this void, undisturbed and thermally stable for 8 years, now contained an established colony of Apis mellifera, the European honeybee, numbering by subsequent entomological estimate approximately 45,000 individuals. The biology of a disturbed bee colony is built on a chemical escalation system. When a honeybee stings, it releases isoamyl acetate, a volatile compound that signals defensive recruitment to other bees. More stings mean more isoamyl acetate, which means more stings, a positive feedback loop that escalates until the stimulus is removed or the available bees are exhausted. 45,000 bees generating continuous alarm pheromone in an enclosed space is not a situation that resolves quickly. Christophe, cutting through the plasterboard wall to access the service corridor, introduced vibration and then a breach into a structure that 45,000 insects had considered home for 8 years. They had a documented opinion about this. Christophe had one recorded bee sting allergy on a medical file from 2019 that he had not considered relevant to the evening's planning and for which he carried no epinephrine. A single sting for a severely allergic individual triggers anaphylaxis, systemic mast cell activation, histamine release throughout the body, airway swelling, vascular collapse, and cardiovascular compromise that without immediate epinephrine progresses to fatal outcome in minutes. The colony did not limit itself to one sting. He was found by the owners upon their return at 11:15 in the service corridor, toolkit still over his shoulder. The study was untouched. The beekeeper called to assess the colony described it as healthy, well established, and entirely justified in its response. He wanted to pass through a wall cleanly and quietly. Biology, which had been living in that wall for 8 years without being consulted about his schedule, expressed its institutional opinion with 45,000 votes, all cast simultaneously and with complete conviction. That story involved a security system that the property itself did not know it had. Our final story involves a security system the target most definitely did know it had, and a man who spent 11 months planning around every part of it except for one infrastructure update filed with the Amsterdam municipality in 2021. Number 10. Amsterdam, the Netherlands, is a city built on water in the most literal architectural sense, 90 islands, 1,200 bridges, land reclaimed from a river delta through centuries of hydraulic engineering that represents some of the most sophisticated water management in human history. The Dutch relationship with water is not casual. It is existential, technical, and ancient. 48-year-old Peter understood this in the general cultural sense. What he had not fully accounted for was how directly it applied to the specific wall he had selected for drilling at 1:40 in the morning. Peter was a planner. He had spent 11 months and approximately 32,000 euros developing what was, by any fair assessment of the components he knew about, a genuinely impressive operation. His target was a private vault facility in the basement of a renovated canal house in the Grachtengordel district. He had identified the utility entry route through an adjacent property. He had confirmed the dimensions of the connecting passage. He had sourced a battery-powered Makita HR2631FT rotary drill with a diamond-tipped masonry bit, specifically selected for low vibration noise, and had calculated the drilling time for the 1.2-meter concrete wall separating the utility passage from the vault's anteroom at approximately 40 minutes. He had studied the publicly available municipal utility maps, which reflected the infrastructure as of the most recent survey completed in 2019. In 2021, following structural movement in a section of the Prinsengracht Canal Bank, the Water Authority had rerouted a secondary drainage conduit through the block, placing a 200mm pressurized water main at a depth approximately 200mm above the midpoint of Pieter's intended drilling target. The updated routing had been filed with the municipality. It had not been reflected in the publicly available utility map, which was still showing the 2019 configuration. Pieter had checked the map. The map was wrong. He had no way of knowing this from the surface. He began drilling at 1:40. The Makita performed exactly as specified. 37 minutes in, the diamond bit penetrated the final concrete layer. It also penetrated the 200mm pressurized water main behind it, which was carrying municipal water at 5.5 bar, approximately 80 pounds per square inch, the pressure at which water exits not as a flow, but as a continuous high-pressure jet. The utility passage, 2.4 meters by 1.6 meters with no active drainage, filled accordingly. The vault facility's anteroom received similar treatment. The Water Authority's pressure monitoring system registered the drop at 1:47 and dispatched an emergency crew. The vault's water intrusion alarm, installed as a precaution after the 2021 drainage works in which Peter had no knowledge of, activated at 1:49 and notified vault management. Police arrived at 2:03. Peter was located in the passage at 2:11, standing in approximately 1.3 meters of pressurized Amsterdam municipal water, holding a Makita drill with IPX4 waterproofing, which covers splash resistance rather than submersion, and which had therefore added an electrical dimension to an evening that had already made its point. The vault contents were assessed the following day undamaged. The drilling pattern in the concrete wall was described by the repair contractor as professional work, which was, under the circumstances, accurate. He wanted to bypass every security system in the building. The one he had not modeled was a 200mm pressurized water main installed 2 years after the map he had studied. 11 months of planning, 32,000 euros of preparation, and one infrastructure update he had never found, all converging in a column of Amsterdam canal water at 1:47 in the morning. The vault always wins. Peter simply didn't know yet that he was playing against water, and there it is. 10 heists, 10 countries, 10 different ways of colliding with the same fundamental truth: the universe does not distinguish between a good plan and a bad one. It only distinguishes between accurate information and inaccurate information, and it applies the same physical laws to both with complete impartiality and zero sympathy. So here is the real question this episode keeps raising: which of these people came closest to actually pulling it off? The one who spent 11 months planning and hit a water main, or the one who wrapped a chain around an ATM and received his own tow hitch as a return delivery? Drop your answer in the comments, because that debate has been running since we finished this script and nobody on the team has agreed yet.